Hello, it is Ian May, Director of Disability Policy and Programs in the Department for Education. I'm proud to introduce you to 4 presentations prepared by parents examining the concept of inclusion, often through the eyes and experiences of their child. They look at inclusion differently and consider the range of opportunities that have happened for their child, some of the challenges, and some of the ways that they see that we could enhance the educational outcomes for all children through inclusion. These were first presented at a parent forum in Term 1, 2018. The Parent Forum is a new department initiative where parents come together discussing issues related to disability and how collaboration and networking are important strategies of improving the well-being and learning for children with disability.
Good morning. My name's Wendy and I have a daughter Tahlia who is 9, and I have attempted to try to imagine this from her perspective. She's unfortunately not at a point developmentally where she can really respond productively to the sorts of questions that Julie was able to ask her son. Despite the fact that she's gifted academically, she's extremely delayed socially, emotionally, and as I go through the presentation you'll get a better picture of her complexities. Which one moves forward? Just that one there. So this is our gorgeous daughter Tahlia, and I've just given you some of the wonderful strengths that she does have, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is her challenges and why inclusion has been so difficult. Okay, so Tahlia has extremely poor emotional regulation, and that's not the sort of emotional regulation that can be changed with using a 5-point scale, positive behavioural supports and that sort of thing. This is a fundamental lack in some of her core capacities to regulate at all, her awareness of her body, her emotional development. She has an extreme and obsessive need to avoid and resist other people's demands and expectations, and that's rooted in deep anxiety about the world and her experience of it. A total egocentrism, an absence of care in any sense of the imagination, and oblivious to others' distress. A lack of sense of self. At this stage, we really don't feel she has any integrated sense of self. She sees me as an extension of herself. Any responsibility is externalised. She experiences no guilt or remorse, even in situations where she could have put somebody's life in danger. She has no understanding of that. A complete unawareness of the impact of her behaviour on others, the anxiety-driven need to control, that's the environment, and the behaviour, thoughts and feelings of others. And when she's faced with demands or limitations on her freedom, such as not entering a building in the middle of the night because it's locked, she gets into a panic response which results in her trying to flee, break in, injure, etc. So a general inability to change her behaviour as a result of consequences. So she has a really good cognitive awareness of things, but that head knowledge is in no way translated to her ability to put that into practice when she has any emotional capacity at all. She tends to deny reality and try to impose her own reality on things. So she may ask me for a particular piece of equipment to do some activity that we're doing. Mum, can I have a piece of Perspex this big? Terribly sorry, darling, I don't happen to have a piece of Perspex that big sitting around the house. You're lying. Where is it? So it's... and then a big meltdown and violence and a range of things. No understanding of hierarchy or safety. We had a situation where she did run away from home in distress after a particular incident, and we eventually managed to, or the police eventually found her about an hour later. She was not at all distressed, and she absconded twice in their attempts to get home, and she has absolutely no understanding of why an adult should have any reason to provide her with assistance, teaching, tell her what to do, but she has no respect for any sort of authority. Rigidity of thinking, intolerance of boredom, repetition, frustration, delay and uncertainty, spontaneous extreme behaviour, threats, abuse, physical outbursts, flight, regardless of context. Front of the Queen would be exactly the same. And a Jekyll and Hyde presentation, incredibly variable. If you meet her, you may think she's the most charming, amazing creature that we know she is, but she can be so unpredictable and impulsive. So you can see that these sorts of disabilities are very, very difficult to accommodate in an educational context. And so I guess my plea is for kids like this, who are very, very difficult to be around other kids and other people for safety and for a range of issues. And I think that probably a good number of people who are homeschooling may have kids with very complex behaviours that may not be the same as Tahlia's, but there could be things there, and that when we look at inclusion, we need to think about these kids that are on the really complex extreme end as well, because we're hanging in there with the system, but Tahlia has only been at school for a couple of hours a day, a few days a week for the last 2.5 years, and each year we've had a hiatus of weeks to months whilst a program and a specialist teacher and an environment was put in place for her. This is the 3rd year in a row that we've had that. She's not back at school yet this year, but she will be back in a good environment. But for 3 years in a row we've had that, but we're still hanging in there. It would have been very easy for us to homeschool, which means she completely lose contact with anyone in the educational department. So her official diagnoses: autism, level 3 in both domains, pathological demand avoidance, which is a very interesting one. It's recognised by the National Autistic Society in the UK as a unique profile within the autism spectrum, having the commonalities of all kids with autism, but with with complex additional characteristics, many of which I just outlined, but there are others that you may wish to read about. She also has a vision impairment. She's legally blind, but makes great use of the acuity that she has, and chronic sleep disturbance. She's also gifted IQ-wise, but not able to use that in any meaningful way. Chronological age, 9 years and 10 months. Social emotionally, 6 to 18, sometimes less. Sometimes more, because she does have these, when she's really relaxed, she can actually do some things that appear to be quite higher order thinking. Okay, our dreams for the future: that she would have a meaningful relationship or friendship with one other person, preferably outside our family, because she's going to be the last of our downline. And my husband and I are older parents, my parents are older, and we have nobody else. So we would love for her to have a relationship with somebody. We would like her to have a functioning sense of self and a positive self-esteem, that she belonged and was valued somewhere, equipped to engage with life to the greatest extent possible and to the greatest extent that she desires. Not all people desire the same level of social engagement. The ability to apply her abilities to actually achieve a sense of fulfilment, because she's gifted. She has a mind that needs stimulating. She wants novelty, she wants new learning, but she has none of the basic skills that we all use to effectively achieve that: perseverance, frustration tolerance, respecting others and learning and processes. Living in a safe, caring home. We're terrified about her physical environment when my husband and I pass. Okay, what would inclusion mean for her? Being at school for the entitled number of hours per day and days per year. Feeling she belongs, is valued, heard and understood, participating in a developmentally appropriate program, and for her that's a really difficult balance between what are basic therapeutic aids in trying to develop her body awareness, emotional development as a precursor for self-awareness and regulation, and then she can actually start to learn in a formalised sense. She's learnt a huge amount of stuff, facts, but not practical information or practical ways of being for existing in the world. Having regular and brief positive contact with one other child. And for us, this would be, we believe, best achieved in a very specialist setting, which would be co-located with and considered an important part of mainstream. A classroom environment at this point in her life is not feasible. So the hub that I would have in mind would be a place where the physical environment, the philosophy, staffing and programs were tailored for a small cohort of students with similar needs, maybe kids with that PDA profile. I've got some examples there if you want to look them up. There's a great school in the UK, which is an autism-specific school but with a PDA unit, and I've given you a link there. And the other one is a school with a therapeutic underlying base where they're looking at kids with complex social emotional problems. Now, I won't go through these in detail. These are the educational strategies recommended for kids with PDA. And again, when you look through that, you'll see why this is quite different from what can easily be achieved in the mainstream setting. But for kids with a milder presentation, it can be, with creative work. So we're looking at regulation, relationship, minimal ground rules for these kids and being very flexible, adjusting demands and expectations depending on anxiety on a particular day, collaboration, providing control and autonomy as much as possible, using indirect non-confrontational requests, viewing meltdowns as panic attacks, starting afresh often, multiple times a day, lots of safe retreat places which are available for as long as needed. Tahlia can only be at school for an entire day if the school is very comfortable with the idea that some days she can't do anything other than sit in the corner, read, use the iPad, do the sorts of things she needs to stay regulated in that environment. One of the really interesting things is that a lot of the gold standard strategies for working with the majority of autistic children are not very effective for kids with a PDA profile. So structured teaching, your regular positive behavioural support practices, sort of first, then, incentives, rewards, those sorts of things are very minimally effective with these kids, and if so, only very temporarily. Scheduling, that sort of thing. Novelty is a powerful motivator, but it has to be novelty within a safe context. She still requires that certainty, but novelty is really positive. And a plethora of strategies. Nothing that works one day is likely to work a couple of days later. So you can't get a system in place, everyone just please follow the rules, this child will be fine. It doesn't work like that. So in the broader school, we need a culture that values diversity and embraces inclusion, leadership, staff and students, and upwards into the department. And for me, that includes embracing that kids have different educational needs and that some can't be in mainstream despite everybody's best attempts, but that it's okay, it's okay for these kids to have a different environment that we can embrace. Just like in a hospital system, we have a tertiary hospital, we have primary care facilities, we have people being cared for at home, which is wonderful, but we still value those higher levels of care, and I think it's the same for inclusion. If we're looking at a hub where the kids can then be worked in with the mainstream as much as possible, so whether that's going regularly to a specific subject area, participating in all the community events at the school, mentoring and scaffold interactions with particular selected children, etc. And students, very similar to what Julie said about her son, that would need to be with students who actually see the value and actually themselves feel the value of that interaction with our child, not doing it because they're required to. And for Tahlia, a very practical area, she needs a locked perimeter fence because she is a flight risk. But if you have a situation where, similar to some special schools that I visited, there's a complex locking system to get in and out of the school, we would be in meltdown before we got in with the waiting to get through the doors, and that would be the end of the day. So a situation such as some of the Catholic schools have, you walk through the office and there's just a door closed with a little snib that anyone can access. She's safe, but she doesn't have the frustration of waiting for complex procedures. So physical environment, I know we'll be talking about more with Judith this afternoon, but focused on developing core capacities that are underlying her regulation. Individual learning environments, the example of the Robert Ogden School, each child has their own room and they actually control who enters, which teachers they invite into that space. They have complete control, and they have actually taken some kids who were out of school from that point of complete disengagement to completing their GCSE and or whatever they call the equivalent over there. Tahlia requires a minimum of 1-to-1 staff ratio, probably 2-on-1 for safety, and a shared common area so that she would be ostensibly on her own with her teacher but able to integrate. We were offered a place in a beautiful program last year, but unfortunately it was based around the kids being together for the majority of the time with breakout areas. She's not ready for that yet. Sensory gym facilities for body awareness, an intentional, stimulating, multi-sensory and varied learning environment. This is a gifted child that is really frustrated. So an environment with little academic stimulation doesn't work. Easy access to facilities at the broader school. So really practical things like if she has to walk outside and get wet, we're not going to achieve a successful transition to the toilet or to another location. If she has to put on sunscreen to go and use an outside area, it's not going to work. She will never go there. Who the teachers are is actually more important in some ways than qualifications, because it is the underlying beliefs and orientations that they have, that the skills and the particular ideas can be learnt. That parents are welcomed and considered vital partners, that there's a conscious team approach, teachers, assistants, therapists, parents, students and others, they're all included because education is so much broader than just the academic curriculum. Everyone sharing a belief in the child's value, their ability to grow, change and relate. And this is really important, and that's one of the things that a specialist unit can provide. these kids are really, really difficult to work with. We feel abused and traumatised every day living with Tahlia, as does her teacher. She was suspended last year because her teacher was so traumatised. That was her one-on-one specialist teacher in a special one-room environment. If they're in a hub with a lot of students, like, well, 4 or 5 students like this perhaps, and maybe 8 or 10 staff, they can support one another and they can normalise the feelings that they're having and the frustrations they're experiencing, because this is a really difficult thing. These kids are hard to be with. So the program, grounded in PDA guidelines, responsive to an individual program, providing space for regrouping. For Tahlia, play-based, developmentally relevant and child-led, but a real balance between, for her, cognitive stimulation and her emotional developmental needs. The emotional developmental needs are much what you would do with a toddler and a baby. Cognitive stimulation more like a high school student, so it's a really challenging combination. The students are always welcome to join in the larger community and affiliated with a particular group, so they have that sense of belonging, and as I mentioned before about peers being involved. Here's some organisations involved with PDA research. It's not officially recognised in a lot of places, but it's gaining a lot of research, and it's useful, even if not as a formal diagnostic category. It's useful because it provides different strategies for this subgroup of kids that require different handling in an educational setting. And I think that's why the UK has run with it, because they found it worked. And some more links for you as well. And a farewell.
I thank the parents for these presentations. Personally, I found them very powerful, uplifting, and at times challenging. But know that they form part of the rich dialogue around inclusion, because inclusion needs to be seen from a variety of perspectives. Yes, school staff and principals, parents and families, but most importantly, through the child themselves. I think these presentations form part of the discussions that we all need to consider and have. And once again, hope they add a richness to your understanding of inclusion.